Perfect. It was a great talk. Thanks a lot also, Bettina, for your talk. Before we are passing to the panel discussion, where we are inviting also 2 further panelists, I would like to give you a feedback on the 2 questions we were sending to the audience. So the first question was, is your organization already actively involving patients and citizens in your activities? So we have here nearly, I was surprised, I'm surprised that there are already 55% that are answering, yes, we are already including patients and citizens in our activity, not only in form of donors, patients, but really in the activities. So that's, I think, already a great feedback. And then we asked, what are the most important aspects where patients needs to be engaged? And here, you can see also the answers on the question. So the process where the audience think patients' involvement is the most needed is in treatment decision-making process. Well, therewith, again, thanks to the 2 speakers. And I hand over to Mette and David for the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Monica. Yes, as you know, we have a panel, and our panel is the 2 speakers that you have already heard and been introduced to. And then we also have 2 other panelists who I will briefly introduce to you. We have Peter Goodhand, who is the CEO of the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health in Canada, and who has for many years played a key role in the health research advancement community. And he has also many years experience as a patient advocate and a navigator himself. And then we're also happy to welcome Larry Norton, who is a medical oncologist and a researcher from the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in the US. He has many years of experience in cancer research. He has been the president of the American Society of Clinical Oncology and also a member of the US advisory boards of the National Cancer, the National Cancer Advisory Board. So David and I are looking very much forward to a very engaged and fruitful discussion within the panel and with the audience. But before we kick off the discussion, Peter and Larry will have the opportunity to make a short statement, and then we'll move on with the more general discussion. So I don't know if you would start out, Peter.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So first of all, it's a great pleasure and privilege to be part of this panel. Really enjoyed both talks that came before. And many times points were just resonating with me both at a personal level and a professional level. And I think that's probably anyone who's interested in this this challenge of how we bring patient perspectives forward will always have those two aspects to it, what your own personal perspective and the one you bring through your work. For me, probably followed to some extent Bettina's path. My first experience was as a patient navigator, and I do represent that privileged group, but it didn't feel like it back then. I was 31 years old. We had 3 young children, and I had a wife with an undiagnosed, and it seemed undiagnosable cancer. After 2 years of misdiagnosis, we finally found the right experts in a different country, an elite institution, and got treatment. And although they told us that life expectancy, the highest they'd had was 3 years, they had a new therapeutic approach, a new study. The real learning though, my wife lived for 12 years. Most of those were good years. She went back to teaching. She watched our kids grow up, even though it was a difficult experience for them. But both her oncologists, the first oncologist and the second oncologist, died before she did. And with them died most of the world's real expertise in that rarest of rare cancers that she had. So that left me, I'd gone on a journey from being completely scared and uncertain, but I learned to become an expert in that one very narrow type of cancer. I became a navigator and an advocate for her. And it wasn't always about health. Sometimes we were denied she was denied Canadian citizenship because of her health condition. We'd relocated from UK through US. So some of my advocacy was nothing to do with health, but it was very much in the family. Subsequently, I left industry and moved to run the Canadian Cancer Society. And all of a sudden, I had 100,000 patients that I got some level of responsibility for. It wasn't as personal, but it also told me that our experience, while it wasn't unique, wasn't typical. People went through this very differently, each family, each individual. They might go through it differently the second time than they did the first time. It was incredibly personal, and what it taught me, now becoming a professional advocate and somebody representing a community of patients, is that I had to step back from my own personal experience, use it to inspire me, but don't be shaped by it, because it wasn't just all about my experience. As I moved on from that to the Global Alliance, I came out of the community, the cancer community, got much more experience in the rare disease community, and finally realized that what we'd gone through was a hybrid of a rare disease family experience in a cancer setting. And the way I see rare disease groups mobilize is now, because of the rareness of the disease, they can't achieve what they need to achieve for themselves, for their families, inside their own local healthcare system. They either have to go to a national level or increasingly to an international level. So I think when we look at rare disease across any spectrum, we immediately have to go to this idea of crossing outside the healthcare system in which you live. And that adds a layer of complexity, and it needs another kind of patient power. And I'll stop at that.
Okay, thank you so much, Peter, also to share your personal experience. And then would you say a few words, Larry?
Well, first of all, it's a great pleasure being here among you. I'm blown away, use the American expression, by the erudition and the sophistication of all the speakers that I've heard so far. I am a physician, I'm a clinical investigator, I'm a laboratory investigator, and I'm involved in trying to solve cancer by every means I can, governmental action, advocacy, every way I can, my entire life. And I'm right now, and I think the way to introduce some of my comments in this regard is one of my major areas of research now is trying to understand the complexity of biology. And one of the major things that we've learned is that much of the notion of precision medicine is based on a mythology. And the mythology is that you have an abnormality at the molecular level, you can develop a drug to attack that molecular level, and that will solve the problem. And we're learning over and over again, in clinical trials, that that's not the case. And that biology is much more complicated than the simple notion of the target and the arrow that hits the target, and everything sort of gets better. But I think that so what I'm working on basically is trying to understand complex systems in ways that they can be manipulated in a constructive fashion. And when I listen to all the talks today, I think that we're all wrestling with the same problem. And one of the interesting things about history in general is that at any one point in history, the scientists and the artists tend to be trying to solve the same problem, even though they may not communicate and they may not know it. I think that we're all trying to solve the same problem, which is basically, how do you apply precision to very complex systems that are really not amenable to the tools that we have for solving those things. So I've heard three major themes in this regard. The first I've already mentioned, which is the notion of what is precision medicine and does it really work, and how can we study it in a way that we can actually help the individual in their goals. The second is the nation of goals and values, and one of the things that I hear in these talks that I'm impressed with in my own life is that value systems tend to be very menu driven. And very dichotomous. You tend to label your values by what society labels as values, rather than values that actually may come from your own internal experience. And so you know, the notion of values, we have these conversations with patients all the time. So, you know, I mean, is quality of life or length of life more important to you? That's a very artificial distinction. I want to have a long quality life is the answer, right? But on the other hand, you know, you're forced into a dichotomous decision that is a menu-driven value system. And the third, which I think is the most important, is that the distinction between patient and healer is a very artificial one. It applies to a specific point in time. At a specific moment, somebody may be ill and somebody may be in a position that can help them. But that every one of us is either an actual or potential patient, and every one of us is either an actual or potential healer. So we're all in this together. And everything that we're talking about in terms of helping patients, we're talking about helping ourselves, and everything we talk about in helping ourselves is helping patients, because we're really all one community. And I think that we have to be very careful in all of our thinking for artificial distinctions, usually dichotomous distinctions, that may inhibit our ability to achieve what our ultimate goal is, which is the optimal health, as that patient defines what they mean by optimal health for the optimal individual, for the individual. And my job as a clinical investigator and as a laboratory investigator and as a physician is to develop procedures, processes to get us to the goal that we all actually share and that we've all basically espoused in our various presentations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Larry, for this perspective. I think I will start out where you ended with, we are all in this together. We are all in this complexity together. And it made me ask if there is, I mean, even though that we are all in it together, the situation may look different if you are a patient in a treatment situation and you are very sick, and the involvement and engagement that you would like to have in this situation is obviously different than seen from the perspective of a person who do not really know that he or she is potentially a patient and needs to contribute to the development of personalized medicine, for instance, through being positive towards sharing data for development of personalized medicine and other kinds of technological advancement. So my question, and I know it's a rather broad question, is how do we ensure that you get all these people that all of us actually are together in solving these complexities and reaching the goal of providing good healthcare for all of us in the end? So how to do it? The situation may look a bit different from those who are not directly engaged in the treatment situation than those who actually are. So do you have any comments? And if you would like to raise, you just wave your hand and then I will pass the floor to you.
Well, I'll just start things off here, and I'm sure all of us are thinking about this. I'll tell you how we've approached it, in terms of this thing. So I'll just give you the example of something called the Translational Breast Cancer Research Consortium, which is a large group of cancer centers in the United States that's conducting breast cancer research, clinical trial breast cancer research. And it was modeled on the notion of cooperative groups that I've been involved with really for many decades. And the way it's organized is that there are committees, basically groups, and that have different focus. Focus on local therapy, focus on systemic therapy, focus on immuno-oncology, and so on. But we have an equally powered group of patient advocates that have absolutely equal power and equal say in the design of the research, the interpretation of the research, and the generation of trials and the interpretation of trials. So it's a matter of a hierarchical organization. Of course, each of them has a leader, and then those leaders, organize into steering committees, and the steering committees, progress up to a certain small group of people with leadership. But the representation is equal. And so the expert in biology, the expert in medicine, and the expert in the patient experience have an equal seat at the table in terms of things. And now there are concrete things, the design of informed consent documents, in a way that people can really understand them and that are meaningful to them. The development of something which is we haven't mentioned earlier, except sort of in passing, which is patient-reported outcomes, the ability of patients to actually record their own experience in a way that becomes data, so that it can be interpreted in a general level and then drive down to the individual level. That's an extremely important part of this. The notion of choices, we're wrestling right now with a concept called de-escalation therapy, which is instead of adding on more drugs that may have toxicities to try to make things incrementally better, can we actually achieve what we are currently achieving, in many cases is good results, although not perfect results, with less therapy so that you return some quality of life to the treatment. It's called de-escalation. Very complex topic. How much efficacy are you willing to give up to have a significant improvement in your life experience in terms of reduced toxicity is a very, very difficult kind of question. And these are things that you can't answer without expertise from the patient point of view. And people who've been there and are going through it and have loved ones or other people they're close to who've been there and have to weigh in on these things because the personal experience becomes a very important part of it. So I think there are ways of organizing clinical research systems that can take all of this into account. Is it perfect? Of course not. And can we improve upon it? I think I've already improved upon it. I have ideas of how I can improve upon it, what I've heard today in these wonderful sessions, both from Barbara and Bettina, how it can be improved. But there are ways of accomplishing this. And I think the important thing is mutual respect, equal representation, and an appreciation that expertise is not just, how does this molecule work, but expertise is also about the personal experience in going through and dealing with an illness.
Thank you. I have two. I can see that Bettina wants to say a few words, and afterwards it's Barbara.
Sure. I mean, that was perfect, actually, to build on what Larry just said. I think we have to get sharper on what presents value and to offer value to everyone, because you already alluded to data sharing. I mean, if you have a patient network, everyone wants access to patients, right? And then they come, share your data. And then you go, so what's in it for me? Mm-hmm. And then comes something like scientific progress. And you go, excuse me? I mean, it's nice. I've worked in academia. I know that you need publications for your next promotion, your next grant, and for your ASCO presentation, right? So people have vested interest, and that's what I spent so much time on last year. Everyone has vested interest. What we expect patients to be these phenomenal, altruistic other beings. As Larry just said, we are all actually the same group. So I think a lot of the issues that are not solved is having a concrete value proposition of what actually makes a difference for patients. And we would be surprised what matters to people. And once you have that value proposition, people will be able to share. But I think we have to start honestly what every party needs and wants to get out of it, and then find a deal that works for one. For example, to build on the PRO tools, I mean, I've just been surviving a round of discussion in melanoma where we've been hating the available tool for a long time because it doesn't capture what matters to our people. We've actually published it. And then the answer is everyone is using it. So I really love Barbara's. I'd love to have your slides, Barbara. I just heard you're not going to share it. I'd love to have your slide decks because I have this empowerment scale. It really got me really thinking. As a patient advocate, of course, I see the reverse of it. I don't like the term of empowering. Because empowerment has this, I'm so gracious, I hand over some power to you, poor thing, which is, of course, not how I see myself. So we prefer the term of agency. And we try, and actually it's just the reverse side of it. We try to help patients to assume that agency so that they can make use of, how do you call the first one? I took notes, but I was too slow. So that was your first idea of personal, individual choices. And you can see the two sides of that. And I think it's a really important process that patients also recognize. I always tell our people, like, our experience is unique. And I'm sure Peter will he just described it very, very precisely. No one has that type of personal experience. If we don't share it with anyone else, if we don't point it out, who will? How? We didn't know. I mean, I'm a trained medic. I had no idea how it is to be at the receiving end of the system. If I'm not speaking up, who will? Who can I even expect to know what I go through? So I think that's a responsibility that we as members of societies have assumed. So we have a knowledge that no one else has. And if we don't share it, no one will know. And I see it as a responsibility. And I think putting this together, we have a chance to really move things. And I think it's great to hear that, it's like Larry's initiatives. I love to see more of that type of initiatives, because you need a structural thinking. And that's the last time I'm ending with that. I believe we need processes that allow this to happen. Otherwise, it's just goodwill. It's haphazard. It's not really driving. We need a real structure around it to make it happen.
Thank you so much, both Bettina and Larry, for these important points. And I can see that Barbara would like to respond here as well. And Peter has also asked for the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. I think, Larry, you made a very important point by reminding us that those positions that we occupy are not stable. So, or the boundaries are not so clear always. People can be in an interaction as a caregiver, as a doctor, as a nurse, but also as a patient, and of course as people we draw upon many of those roles. But that could be seen as a trivial statement, right? But it is not trivial in the sense that increasingly systems are moving towards value-based pricing and reimbursement models, and if it goes badly, it just becomes that then patient experience becomes just a customer satisfaction score. Mm-hmm. And of course, this is what nobody wants. So this is why Bettina's point about what is actually also value and how do we define it and who defines it is very important. And here, I think a lot of the value, when we ask people what matters for their lives, what makes a difference in their recovery, what makes a difference in their diagnosis, it's often the soft, quote unquote, stuff that is not captured in data. It's the personal dimension, the personal relation. Can I actually speak to a human being? Does the human being look at me? Does the human being hear me? So it's this kind of interaction and this relational quality that is now maybe a nice to have in the system, but the more patient experience measures, and Larry has mentioned them, will become a criterion for reimbursement and pricing, the more these quote unquote soft things will matter and will become economically important. And what I would like to hear from colleagues is whether you think this is a kind of naive vision that I'm hoping that value-based healthcare will actually help to bring meaningful participation of everyone forward, or whether you have a more pessimistic view on this. I would just love to hear the assessments and thoughts of colleagues on this.
Yeah, maybe Peter has some input here. Thank you so much, Barbara. You have to unmute yourself, Peter.
Peter, you're muted.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I unmuted myself or you did it for me. So I'll try and get back to Barbara's point, because I do think it's interesting, but it's also very contextual based on the healthcare system you're in. But what I was actually going to say on this issue of incentives and willingness to share, when we look at it, and this is mainly Anna Middleton's work on Your DNA, Your Say, but when we look at this idea of, would you as the general public, not a patient, but as the public writ large, be willing to share your genomic and health-related data with different groups? The range is from, I think the lowest I've ever seen in one country for sharing with for-profit researchers, industry, was 20% of people were willing to share. And at the other end, in the 60s and 70s in other places, willing to share with their own doctor or with medical staff. And somewhere in the middle, 40, 50% willing to share with not-for-profit academic researchers. So that's one sense. When we get to the national medicine initiatives, the healthcare systems, where they're asking this question of patients, particularly rare disease and cancer, we see a willingness to share that's in the 80s and 90s from the patient group. So they're closer to that sense. And typically the incentive is they don't want another individual or another family to have to go through what they've experienced. But if contributing their data can help accelerate, improve treatments for other people, particularly their own friends and family, then that drives that participation. At the extreme end, we've got people who are incredibly frustrated and angry that their clinicians are not sharing data with other people because they feel it's such a wasted opportunity to help other people. So you've got a full continuum. But to Barbara's question on value-based medicine, I'm often, when we get these great ideas of learning health systems and everybody sharing together and we're generating all this information, I'm often reminded of a presentation by an oncologist from a community cancer center in the US who said, I have 12 minutes per patient. I just need decision tools. I need to cultivate this. And I think 85% of cancer care is typically done outside an academic environment. So I think we've got, as we all participate in this space, the question is, how can we, in the environments we're privileged to operate in, at this interface of healthcare and clinical research and traditional research, how can we optimize the system there? But let's be realistic that 85% of the system is not in that environment. And we're going to have to engineer solutions that can work across the healthcare systems, not just in a few centers of excellence.
Thank you so much, Peter, for these inputs. Any other comments to this question, or maybe we will move on? And I think that maybe David would like also to explore another issue.
Yes, thank you very much. I have this is a very interesting discussion. I have a question to ask you. Can patient participation be harmful? Have you seen that happening if the work of decision making is devolved to patient? Have you seen negative effects? I have, but I would like to hear from you. Who would like to start? Bettina.
Well, unfortunately, I have to agree with you. And already coming back to this data issue, for example, I think it's a very good example. Because if you're operating in a very complex space without understanding all the ramifications of it, I think it's really, really actually nearly unfair to ask a person to make a decision. Because, I mean, I've seen also these ones we don't want to share with industry. You know, big nasty pharma is the classic one that comes then. If you look at who develops the drugs, I mean, we have a stage 4 patient who puts it beautifully. I'm alive because of drugs. No good attitude, no green tea, no positive motivation. So that is already not consistent. You can't on one side say, oh, I don't share with these type of people, but then expect a treatment to be standing there once you need it. That's inconsistent. Also, people think, because I would have said the same, of course, you want to protect your own family. But for example, someone goes out and checks out whether you're going to end up with Alzheimer in a couple of years. And that affects your kids as well, by the way. There's a reason why Craig Venter didn't publish that part of his genome, by the way, because he shared his genome, except for that locus. So, you know, there are these things that I think it's hard to make a decision in a highly complex system if you don't have all the information. I think that's even actually unfair because you can engineer whatever answer you want, and then that's defeating the purpose. Something that Barbara alluded to and something that I find really, really tricky is this, you know, as Peter said, we also these privileged patients. And I think it is really risky. You just have to select a group of people to engineer what you want. And I haven't found a good answer to that, unfortunately. So I do believe that we all have to pay extreme attention to that. So unfortunately, I believe it is, you can engineer by not telling people the full story or asking questions a certain way. You can engineer answers that serve your purpose and claim they are done by patients, while in reality they were engineered. And you can do this by multiple facets. So unfortunately, it is not without risk. I don't have a solution, but I unfortunately agree with you.
Barbara, you're next.
Thank you. So first, to your question, David, I do unfortunately also agree that patient participation, if it's used in a formulaic way, if it's an excuse to devolve difficult decision making to individual patients and families, then it is harmful. And in fact, we are running a study in Australia on the relationship between patient-centered care and precision medicine and oncology, where we speak to the lead investigator is Alex Broom, and we speak to healthcare professionals and family members and patients, and being confronted with more options, especially if you can't afford these options, can be tremendously harmful to people. But the question is always, what's the alternative, right? So what and healthcare professionals struggle with this. There are nurses who say, I don't know what's the right thing to do. Should I tell the patient that if they remortgage their house, she could go into this trial, which probably won't help her? Or should I not even say that? So this is the meaning of really deep shared decision making. It has to be something, but we have to maybe also reconsider what paternalism means. Paternalism is not outsourcing. Paternalism is a dirty word, but paternalism comes from, has a good aspect as well of somebody who knew his patients. Let's bracket off the gender dimension, which is problematic, but somebody who knows her patients, who has a relationship with her patients, and then you can make meaningful decisions together. If you strip that relationship of the encounter, then you have a bad paternalism, where somebody imposes their decision that might be driven by self-interest or by something else on others. But a paternalism in the sense of knowing each other and making decisions together, and sometimes making decisions for someone else. I think we need to remove the taboo around that. Barbara Koenig calls it the consent to be governed, which used to be embedded in the patient-physician relationship. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying, doctors should decide everything, but I'm very much in the line of Don Berwick, who says that we need to have meaningful shared decision-making and not an outsourcing of the difficult and the expensive to patients. And if you forgive me, because I've spoken for a long time now, I have to make a small amendment to the Your DNA, Your Say study that Peter, you kindly mentioned, and that Anna Middleton in Cambridge leads, and that I'm involved in as well. It's not really true that people just reject commercial companies because they are naive, but I think what comes through this study, and also a fantastic study that Wellcome have done with Ipsos Mori a couple of years ago, patients and research participants are not egotistic entities. They are not necessarily wanting to get something out of data sharing for themselves, but they want something gained by other people. And they don't mind that commercial companies make profits, but they mustn't be obscene and they mustn't be opaque, and they need to be fair. So as soon as people feel that they're being lied to, that something is happening in a clandestine manner, then the alarm bells ring. And this sometimes manifests itself in what we see in the Your DNA, Your Say study, in a much lower willingness to make data available to commercial companies than to doctors. But let's be careful. That doesn't mean that patients have all idealistic views about or caricaturist views about commercial companies being evil bastards. So I think that is a little bit more nuanced. This is an important point to me, so I had to make it.
I'm not sure if Peter wanted to speak. I have Larry as well. Peter, you need to switch off your microphone. Switch on.
Weird, I thought it. Okay, so Barbara, I completely agree with you. I think that we don't have time to get into the depth of those studies and people's comfort and people's willingness to share. So thank you for making that point. I also often generate how many genomes would that give us even if it was 20% of humans willing to share their genomic and health data. It's about 10 times as much genomic information as we could deal with in the next decade. So 1 billion genomes is about 10 times more than we can possibly start to interpret, and the bottlenecks, as you said. So I think for me, the critical thing is that what we do collectively builds trust, and it builds both at a societal level and a patient level a sense of trust that people are working together and that they are being informed, and that the harm will come, as we described, if harm is done, then it erodes trust and it takes years to rebuild it. So I think for us as custodians of this collective ecosystem, maintaining, building trust by being transparent, being authentic, full disclosure is something that we've all got to share that responsibility.
Thank you, Peter. We have 2 minutes left. Can I invite Larry?
Yeah, boy, there's just so much to talk about. We're having such a great conversation. I wish we can carry it on all day. I mean, just one little side comment is that, you know, we're fearful of sharing our genomic data, but we share so much personal information all the time. Remarkable stories about how, you know, I was at a restaurant and we ordered some wonderful Scottish whiskey for dessert, you know, and even before I got home, I got all these advertisements, you know, on my cell phone for that Irish whiskey, because obviously, you know, somehow the restaurant is connected to my American Express bill or something, and that kind of thing. Is, you know, the amount of information that's available on all this out there all the time is just remarkable, and yet we don't give it a second thought. I think a lot of this boils down to a lot of the discussion. I mean, I want to get back, David, to your original question. Have I seen bad things happen? Yes, I have. And it boils down to the question of something that I'm still learning in my mid-70s, which is humility, knowing what we really know and knowing what we don't know, and be willing to actually identify expertise in other people. And I've seen in this process where scientific decisions are made by people who are really not qualified to make those scientific decisions. And bad research projects have started and good research projects have been stopped, largely because people were going after the topic heading or the potential value of something rather than the likelihood that area of investigation would yield something very important. And I think it's something we all have to learn. All of us in life is not to pretend that we're experts in something that we're not, and to learn how to listen very carefully to people who we do identify as experts, and yet use our decision-making capabilities, our cognitive abilities to be able to interpret that information, but not to assume positions of power that we don't have. And so, I think this applies to all of us on all sides of this issue. I mean, I think the scientists shouldn't make decisions that are very personal and either about what people will want. Yes, people will want this. Well, we don't know that unless we ask the people about what they really want. And similarly on the other side. I mean, I'm just touched by a story happened very recently where a very good scientist had a paper rejected by a major journal because they said, you haven't shown that this phenomena is true in normal bone marrows, only in abnormal bone marrows, and you need some samples of normal bone marrow. So the scientist called me up and said, I need 12 normal bone marrows, and I said, well, you just can't ask people to give normal bone marrows because it's a painful procedure. He says, but don't you understand? I have this paper that's accepted in Science. If only I come up with 12 normal bone marrows, my paper accepted in Science is really important, And I said, okay, listen, come on over and let me do a bone marrow, aspiration on you. Just so you have a sense of what I'm talking about. And he says, well, what does it mean? I said, well, I'm gonna stick this needle into your bone of your hip, and I'll draw something out, and there'll be, some pain involved in this kind of thing. And of course, I'm not going to give you the data of what I learned from this. I'm just want you to learn the experience. And I will say the paper got accepted to the journal anyway. He managed to dance around the issue, but the whole notion of what's important, and here's a scientist determining patients are going to really want my paper to be published in this major journal. Don't you understand that? So now the scientist is an expert in the way people react to having a needle stuck into their bone. So I think it's all about humility, and I think it's something that I'm constantly learning. I'm still learning. Every minute of every day. But on all sides of this issue, it's something that we all have to take into account.
Great example. Thank you, Larry. I just wanted to add that patients have the same right to be harmful than anybody else in the system. And with that, I would like to thank you, the panelists and the speakers, for a great session, and I hand over to Monica to continue.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to the inspiring discussions, and especially this was really the starting point of this conference, because what is personalized medicine for? Why we are doing all these reflections and the funding and everything that is around this personalized medicine topic. Well, it is, I think, because we are doing it for the citizen and the patient. So we should really know what are the needs, when to involve them the best way. And I think that the discussions we had, thanks to you, were very great to have exactly the starting point. And you already introduced some of our conference sessions. And well, we have a very short break, and then we are back at 3:55. And thanks a lot again for all you in the session, and looking forward to the next ones.
Thank you.
Thank you.